For 3,000 years, Egypt felt, well, eternal, right? A kingdom that seemed untouchable, ruled by its own gods and pharaohs. But today we're diving into the 27th Dynasty, a time when that eternal kingdom was brought to its knees, conquered by a foreign power for the very first time.
I mean, really think about that. Imagine a civilization that's been a powerhouse for millennia, a global force. Now, picture it being completely taken over. That's the incredible story we're unpacking today.
For literally thousands of years, Egypt was the master of its own destiny. But then, the 6th century BCE happened. The colossal Persian Achaemenid Empire, and this was the largest empire the world had ever seen, it turned its eyes toward the Nile. A monumental shift in power was on the horizon.
And we're not talking about some quick raid or a temporary setback. Nope. For almost 100 years, the land of the pharaohs was ruled from far away. This was the end of an era. Full stop.
Okay, so here's the game plan for today. It all kicks off with the big conquest in 525 BCE. Then we'll see some different styles of ruling, a whole lot of rebellion, and finally, the Persians getting kicked out in 404 BCE. All right, let's jump right in at the start.
So this whole conquest, it wasn't a slow burn at all. It was fast, it was decisive, and it was led by a king who looked at Egypt with all its incredible wealth and ancient prestige and saw the ultimate prize for his growing empire.
And here he is, the guy who led the charge, Cambyses II. His armies just swept into Egypt, crushed the last native pharaoh of the 26th Dynasty, a guy named Psamtik III, and took over the capital, Memphis. Just like that, the very heart of Egyptian power was in foreign hands.
And this is a really crucial point. Egypt wasn't just conquered, it was basically absorbed. It became what's called a satrapy, which is just a fancy word for a province in the Persian Empire. Think about that. The big decisions, they weren't being made on the Nile anymore. They were being made hundreds of miles away, in the heart of Persia.
So how did the Persians actually rule Egypt? You might think it was all just straightforward oppression, but it's more complicated than that. Really, your life as an Egyptian depended a lot on which Persian king happened to be calling himself pharaoh at the time.
Okay, so first up you've got Cambyses II, the conqueror. His rule was like a blunt instrument. It was harsh, disrespectful, and he really ticked off the powerful Egyptian priests. But then, his successor, Darius I, totally different playbook. This guy was smart. He was an administrator who understood that sometimes respect is a much better weapon than fear.
And you can see his whole strategy in action right here. Darius didn't just rule over Egypt, he ruled as an Egyptian pharaoh. He took their titles, he used the royal cartouche, he even invested money in rebuilding their temples. It was genius, really. He was wrapping his foreign rule in the very fabric of Egyptian tradition.
But let's not get it twisted. This was still an occupation. Sure, the Persian king was called pharaoh, but on the ground, what did that look like? Well, it looked like heavy taxes, a permanent Persian army hanging around, in a system where Egyptians were pretty much locked out of any real positions of power. Control was always in Persian hands.
And this quote, it just nails it. This wasn't some chaotic mess. No, this was a systematic, well-oiled machine, and it was designed to pull as much wealth and as many resources out of its new Egyptian province as possible.
But come on, you can't just take over a civilization with a history like Egypt's and expect everyone to just roll with it. That deep-seated Egyptian pride, it was like a simmering volcano, and sooner or later, that volcano was going to blow.
So Darius's successor, Xerxes I, he got to see that eruption firsthand. When major revolts started flaring up, he didn't try to compromise. His response? He cracked down, hard. He brought in even stricter controls and took away what little power the locals had, which of course just added more fuel to the fire.
So, for decades, this struggle just keeps going on and on, back and forth. But then, you get to this year, 404 BCE, and everything changes.
This was it, the year they finally pulled it off. After all that struggle, a massive, widespread revolt actually succeeds. They do the impossible. They kick the entire Persian administration and army out of the country. And for the first time in almost a century, a native Egyptian was back on the throne.
So, happy ending, right? Well, yes and no. Egypt was free, which was huge, but the world had changed around it. And the illusion that Egypt was this untouchable, eternal kingdom,
Yeah, that was gone forever. So, what's the big takeaway here? Why does this one dynasty matter so much? Well, it was the first time a foreign power completely swallowed Egypt whole, and it showed the world it could be done. It really marked the beginning of a long, slow decline, and it basically created a blueprint for later conquerors like the Greeks and the Romans. And that's the key shift right there. Egypt went from being a superpower to being a prize.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. Once a great empire becomes a prize for other empires to fight over, can it ever really get back to being a superpower again? It's a tough question, and the story of Egypt in the centuries that followed gives us a pretty fascinating and complicated answer.